On November 21st, 1992, Tom Monfils disappeared after a workplace dispute. A day later, his body was found in a pulp vat with a 50-pound weight wrapped around his neck. Over 30 years later, exactly who killed Monfils remains a mystery. Welcome to the Monfils 6 podcast. My name is Damon Schneider.
And I'm Mike Putchell.
Tonight's episode is entitled Revisiting Beyond Human Nature. So we had originally watched the documentary Beyond Human Nature about a year and a half ago, right?
Right.
So we decided to get together and actually rewatch it again and see what stood out to us. So that's what we'll be doing for this episode. The director of Beyond Human Nature is someone named Michael Nielsen. And some of the big takeaways from this, one at the top of the film, Randy Winkler states that this appeared to be a homicide immediately. What struck you about that, Mike?
Yeah, that seemed to be a little bit of a difference from what we knew from the book, because it had been a little bit of some time where the autopsy results had come out. Do you recall exactly the timeline? I think it was at least a week or two.
Yeah, so Monfils is November 21st, and then I think with December 10th or around there, so a couple weeks later.
Yeah.
And one of the big interviews in this film is Cal Monfils, that was Tom's younger brother, and they're 10 years apart, right?
Yeah, 10 years.
And Cal mentions that getting a mill job was like winning the lottery. What did he mean by that?
Just that basically, if you get that call that you're hired there, you're kind of set for the long term. You know, you'll have the good pay, you'll have the benefits, you know, maybe a pension, just a good retirement plan. It's a family supporting job.
Cal Monfils also goes on to say that he thinks that Tom called the police initially because of the shift change. Did you want to just bring up again what the shift change was?
Yeah, that seems to be the most believable reason, because no one really knows actually why Tom wanted Keith to get in trouble. But that seems to be the biggest reason, is that Tom had been one of the big supporters of the 12-hour day shift change, and Keith had been a big supporter of just keeping things the way they were with, I don't fully understand how it worked there, but it was like a rotating shift. And Tom liked the 12-hour days because there's more off time. And it's believed that Keith wanted it to stay the way it was just because that had been what he was used to.
So Monfils then he called the police, and eventually it was found out that the call was made from inside the mill, and then of course Kutzko went on his journey to get the tape. And when Monfils found out about this, one of the things we noted was that he called the police 5 times during the week to tell them that Keith was going to try to get the tape. Why is that important?
Well, I think the 5 times, it really shows his state of mind leading up to him dying. It shows that he was extremely anxious and worried about being found out and kind of pestering the police, really making sure that they're going to do what they say they will do and not release this tape, and that he will remain anonymous.
One of the interesting parts in the documentary, so the day that Monfils went missing, Mike Pye actually said that when he heard that Tom was in the vat, he thought that Tom was hiding inside the empty tissue chest. Why do you think he might have thought that?
Yeah, I don't fully understand why he thought he would be hiding. Uh, do you have any thoughts on what or why Tom would, what would be gained from doing that? I don't really get that.
I don't know. Maybe he wanted to make everyone nervous. He wanted to play a game on people because they kind of played a game on him.
Yeah, maybe, or else, maybe he just went there to, I don't know. I don't think he wanted to face up to what he did. I get a sense that Tom was actually really embarrassed that he was found out, and uh, kind of like had egg on his face, in front of the whole company essentially. And I think he knew that this would forever change how people interacted with him, how they viewed him, their respect for him. So maybe that's the reason, is that he was hiding just to keep away from everybody for a little bit. I don't know though.
So the filmmakers did something interesting in that they portrayed Randy Winkler sometimes in a positive light and sometimes in a negative light. And one in particular, they talked about Steve Stein, who was a mill worker, and how Winkler had gone over to his house. I think he was in the garage at the time, and he tried to get Steve to sign, basically saying that he was guilty. And his wife stopped him at the last second. And then right after that scene ends, the filmmakers go to a recreation of when uh, Winkler was just a little boy and he was driving with his dad, and their rear view, one of their rear lights were out on the car, and this nice police officer got out of his car and got like an extra spare bulb, and like he changed their bulb for them, and then he rode off, not giving them a ticket or anything. He just wanted to help them out of the goodness of his heart. And Winkler states that was the moment that I wanted to be a police officer. So what did you think about that? The fact that sometimes the filmmaker made Winkler look positive, and sometimes they made him look very negative.
I think that's good. I think it shows that he's a human being. He's a well-rounded person. There's good qualities, there's bad qualities. So I think that was realistic.
What about Winkler? What Winkler was saying struck us as a little bit delusional. Do you remember that?
Yeah, he was talking about his interrogation tactics, and the way that he described his tactics actually reminds me of the early years of Law and Order from the early 90s, which is actually right around when this all was going on with the Monfils case, where the detectives like have you in a room and they get in your face and real aggressive verbally, maybe slamming fists down on the table. And then Winkler also said that he had to be careful though, because you don't want to accuse somebody of doing something that they didn't do. But the funny thing about that is there's like at least 10 people from the book where that's like all they said he did to them, is accuse them of things that they didn't do.
Yeah, indeed. Another interesting aspect of the film is the way that Mike Pye sort of describes his ex-wife. He comes across as being sort of bitter about her. Can you talk about how their sort of relationship came apart?
Sure. I'm laughing just because I don't know what really this has to do with the case. I don't even know why it was included in the film. But yeah, so I guess in the early 90s, uh, Mike's wife started seeing somebody else, and she left him for this other man who apparently she's still together with him to this day. And it's clear that Mike is not over that. He did say that he also was unfaithful, so it went both ways. Uh, but yeah, Mike says that the guy's a loser, and he still doesn't have a job. So I don't. He says he's not over that. Clearly, he might say he is, but he obviously was not. But again, I don't know why that was even in the movie.
Yeah, it was interesting. Maybe to round out his personality. Mike Pye also states that when he was interviewed by the police, he had a bad hangover from a big night of drinking. That was something that was not in the book, correct, Mike?
Not that I can remember. I don't remember reading that.
They also had like B-roll shots of a lot of shots of ashtrays and cigarettes being put out, and we kind of speculated, or at least I did, that maybe Winkler was a heavy smoker.
Yeah, sure. Again, another detail. I don't know why it's important, but sure.
I don't know. You think of interrogation rooms and all the smoke and how that sort of wouldn't be pleasant.
Yeah, probably everybody was smoking. All the detectives and maybe even Mike. I don't know.
Winkler also states, or Mike Pye states, that during the interview with Winkler, that he was getting his spit on his face, Winkler's spit.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I mean too with the Law and Order thing. Like, did you watch Law and Order?
I seen some episodes, yeah, for sure.
Interrogations, they do get right in their face, and they get really confrontational to try to draw a confession out of them. So that's exactly what it reminded me of.
So again, the filmmaker does something kind of interesting here. Then, just after he told us, Mike Pye told us that Winkler was spitting in his face. Winkler is on camera saying, "I'm not a bully."
Well, I think it shows we're getting two sides of the story. I think it's probably kind of in the middle, as usual. The truth is in the middle. Uh, I mean, there's just because he was doing those things. I mean, yeah, that doesn't make him a bully. I mean, they're allowed to get confessions out of people, and to me, if people are guilty, they'll confess. Um, in most cases, although we know that sometimes, in the case of Brian Kellner, which we'll talk about, sometimes people end up confessing to stuff that isn't true.
Another point that was brought up at one point was that Monfils was at least briefly alive at the bottom of the vat because he had inhaled the pulp into his lungs. Um, why is that an important point?
Well, it just kind of adds to the fact that, I mean, there's other alternatives where it doesn't mean it was the Monfile 6. It could have been a suicide. Uh, it just kind of adds that there's more to the story there.
So Mike Pye states that he started to take personal notes on the case on the advice of his lawyer. And on October 24th, 1993, Mike Pye speculated that Tom maybe pre planned this suicide because he was becoming paranoid. So that kind of ties in with Monfils calling the police 5 times, the few days before um, Kutska finally got the tape, right?
Right.
So maybe Tom's mental state is breaking down, and he has to come up with a plan B, and perhaps this plan B is just going to be a pre-planned suicide. It also mentions the film mentions that Randy Winkler he showed up at the house of Brian Kellner when Kellner was not around, but his daughter, who was young at the time, was Amanda, and he actually followed her into Brian's house and perhaps uh, tried question her for 2 hours. What did you think about that?
Yeah, that was not something that we heard in the book, and I think that's an important meeting to discuss. Winkler denied doing any of that, but I think it's pretty clear that it did happen. And that's a little weird. That kind of shows that he's uh, very aggressive with getting information. I'm pretty sure that's also illegal. I don't believe you can interrogate a minor without the presence of the parent. So, and again, 2 hours, kind of just waiting there on the driveway and then just walking in the house, kind of taking advantage of the situation, knowing that it's a young kid who doesn't know her rights. Uh, it shows you kind of his tactics.
So the documentary then it cut to again right after Winkler. They had this talking about him talking to Amanda for 2 hours. There was some sort of hearing that took place in 2015, and it wasn't real clear what this hearing was. But Winkler was being asked questions while he was on the stand, and he was basically straight up lying to every question that was being asked. Um, to you, Mike, do you think that Winkler comes across as a pretty devious liar?
I think he knows kind of how to distort the facts. Yeah, I would say that because I mean, obviously one of them is lying in this case. They're one saying it happened and the other saying it didn't happen. So it's got to be one. There's really no middle ground there. Uh, so yeah, I would say he knows how to fool people.
Another aspect that was cleared up with the documentary was that Brian Kellner had custody of his kids, and he had to fight for that. And so we're not sure what happened with his wife, but typically the mother would get custody in most cases. So I'm not sure what happened, but I think that's an important point that Brian Kellner he was fighting to keep his kids with him. That's a big point in the film. D.A. Zukowski then goes on to say in the film that the Monfils Six put Tom in the vat to get rid of the evidence, and I was a little bit puzzled by that. Why do you think he said that?
Well, I'll ask you first though. What puzzled you about that? Why does that concern you?
I was basically because eventually the body is going to be found, unless they thought that the pulp would somehow dissolve the body. Um, we also talked in the past that they did lab tests on the consistency of the pulp and uh, every few hours, and if someone's body was ground up in that those tests would reveal that.
Yeah, I would say that comment is a little confusing to me too, just because there was really no physical evidence testing done anyway, like on Tom's body. Like with the wounds, they never really looked into if they came from the blades or not. So the idea that they did it to hide evidence, well, the police really didn't process much evidence to begin with.
Memento mori. Remember, you must die someday. However, your life can be remembered forever by contacting us at seasonsoflifememorials.com. We are here to teach you how to create a film about your life that can be seen at your future gravesite as well as within the obituary section of your very own newspaper. Contact us today at seasonsoflifememorials.com. So, Mike, could you talk just briefly about our obituary podcast and the celebrity aspect that we'll be doing?
Sure. So we've talked before about the obituary podcast form being kind of a new option for Seasons of Life memorials, and how that really does allow people to uh, memorialize and say what they want to say about the loved one in a way where maybe if they didn't want to be on camera, uh, this is a great alternative to do that. And one thing that we decided to start doing is uh, showcasing the celebrity podcast option, just kind of to showcase how it would work. And so you and I are gonna start doing some of these. Uh, just off the top, I mean, unfortunately, there's been a lot of celebrity deaths just recently, just since the beginning of the year. Uh, just two that I'm thinking of. We know the filmmaker David Lynch passed away, from doing Twin Peaks TV show and movies like Mulholland Drive and Blue Velvet. And then more locally, we know that Bob Uecker passed away. I think they actually passed on the same day. Uh, but Bob Uecker is known, I think, throughout the country, just being on the Johnny Carson show for, I think, 100 appearances. And then he was in some movies and, did a lot of TV commercials. And he was in the broadcasting booth for over 50 years. So I think a lot of people, certainly who follow baseball, know that name and what he did for the sport. So just kind of showcasing uh, how the podcast idea would work. We would do this for just some celebrities that have passed, and just to give people an idea of how that sounds.
And we're back. Now, they showed some footage of Kellner at the trial. It was kind of interesting because he says someone hit Monfils in the back of the head, but he doesn't mention any weapon being used. So I just thought that was kind of strange. That is he trying to say that someone's fist was so strong that it caused the blow to Monfils' head to sort of be caved in at the back? What did you think of in terms of that?
Yeah, I didn't really even think too much about that because we know that, first of all, we know that Kellner wasn't even there when all this was going on. And well, and I should clarify that all this was going on. It didn't even happen. But the Monfils' death, I should say, Kellner was not at work, and so this was again all hearsay. This was that Fox Den incident. Uh, a lot of this stuff we know was kind of put in by Winkler. So, for all we know, it was Winkler who suggested this about the being hit in the head.
Winkler also said that when Monfils was first confronted, that he did not admit to it being his voice on the recording. However, at the beginning of the film, Mike Pye, he straight up says Monfils just admitted it, right from the get go. Um, how does one resolve that contradiction?
Yeah, it's another example of a lot of the inconsistencies with the investigation. I don't know uh, if that's a super important discrepancy, but it does highlight that how familiar are the people with the case details. To me, that's what I get from that.
We also noted how young D.A. Zukowski looked at the trial, and I kind of mentioned to you, Mike, that um, Zukowski, his job was up for re-election as well, and he's still sort of a young guy, maybe early 40s at this point, and so he really wants to keep his job, right? And if he can't prosecute the Monfils Six, he's probably going to lose his job, right?
I think it was definitely a big case. So, yeah, I mean, you could make that argument that this is really kind of a make or break it for him with the keeping the job.
So Zukowski, he goes on to say that the Monfils Six, that they were sort of severely beating Tom up for several minutes. And I just kind of question that just because the time frame itself is only like, I think between like 15 and 18 minutes. We've talked about this in the past. For them to sort of take shots at Monfils, sort of like in a circle, like kicking him and causing all these injuries, that takes some time, right? That doesn't happen in 30 seconds.
Right. Yeah, it's going to be a more in depth beating. It's not going to be a quick thing.
The other interesting aspect in this film is that Randy Winkler tries to turn himself into the victim of the story. He says that he, quote unquote, got ill after the case, but never mentions what that illness was. What did you think about that as far as Winkler trying to make himself into the victim?
Yeah, he said that there were multiple victims in this case. It wasn't just Tom, it was the defendants, it was him as well, Winkler. Uh, I don't have really a real issue with that. I mean, ultimately, the documentary, the point of it is to get multiple different perspectives of the case. And we know that, and we probably will get into this in a little bit, but we say that Winkler was able to get duty disability retirement for PTSD. And I just question, is that the illness that he's referring to? And did he get this illness from working on this case? That's kind of some questions I have.
So Sue Monfils then pointed out she successfully sued the Green Bay Police Department for releasing the tapes, and she was rewarded about $2 million. So it's quite a sum of money. And Winkler goes on to say that the city of Green Bay wanted him to state that the tapes that were recorded with Monfils and Kutzka, that those tapes had been destroyed, but he knew that they had not been. So why is that important?
Yeah, I don't fully get why that was important for the police department. I mean, if the tapes still existed, I don't know what the issue is there. Do you understand that?
I think they were saying Green Bay, they didn't want to pay out the $2 million. And so they just were going to say those tapes they're all missing. And so there's no evidence. And so, Sue, you can't get your $2 million.
Yeah, but I get that, but then the thing is, like, we know, even if they were destroyed then, because this civil trial was going on, like, when? Like 97, 98?
I'm not sure.
Well, let's say it was. It was going on after the Monfils 6 convictions. We know that. I don't understand why it would matter if the tapes still existed, because we know that they did. You know, it's documented that Keith got it.
Yeah, Winkler, he kind of gets uncomfortable during this part of the interview, and he just kind of says, I can't really say anything more about this,
Yeah.
suggesting that there's other things that we don't know.
Yeah, that's right.
So on October 31st, 1997, Winkler retires with duty disability retirement. And then he tries to get worker compensation from the city, and the city of Green Bay refused, citing quote unquote poor judgment, irresponsible behavior, and poor impulse control do not amount to a mental impairment. What did you think about that statement?
I think it's typical workers' compensation denial. I mean, usually they don't want to make the payments. I think his what was his contention that the the case or the job made him mentally ill? Is that why he's trying to get workers' compensation?
Yeah, I think he was trying to claim post traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah, I mean, to me, they're kind of putting it on him that his tactics, the way that he conducted himself on the job, specifically, so the poor judgment, irresponsible behavior, they're kind of blaming him, saying, well, that's how you wanted to do your job.
At this point in the film, when I was originally watching it at the Milwaukee Film Fest, Cal Monfils made a statement that sort of made me think that they might be innocent. When he says that um, they were not smart enough to pull it off. So, meaning the Monfils Six, these guys are blue collar workers, and they were simple people who weren't. They would not have been able to outfox the police. Um, what did you think about that? That Cal Monfils was just saying that they weren't smart enough to do this.
Yeah, well, there's actually a few comments that I have about all of that, and it would maybe even need to be a whole episode. But so there's a few things. Number one, I don't believe that somebody's intellectual level has anything to do with being able to pull off a murder. I I mean I just from a personal standpoint, I do watch a lot of forensic files, and there's tons of cases where people have high levels of education and they get caught. So I don't really know if somebody's intellect has anything to do with it. And two, uh, we know that some of them, at least, like Keith Kutska, he was kind of intellectual. And so I think it's a little presumptuous to say that because you're just a simple blue collar worker, you can't do something like this. But again, that's kind of beside the point because we believe that they didn't do it anyway. So it's kind of a moot point. But I don't believe that one's intelligence level has anything to do with being able to get away with murder.
So we're then introduced to Steve Kaplan, who's Keith Kutka's new attorney. And he just brought up the point that he went back to the press, the newspaper headlines from the early 90s, and he noted that the police were under tremendous pressure to crack this case, and maybe that's what led to some of the mistakes. Um, we also hear sort of a key point in the documentary. Again, Cal Monfils has said that he was he was with Sue, and they were making arrangements for the funeral, and the phone rang. At this point, they did not know that a rope and weight had been tied around Tom's neck. So they heard this information, and then Cal stated that Sue just looked downwards for several minutes, and then she made a very odd statement where she said she wanted to go to the bank. And she said, according to Cal, she was looking at her security deposit box and she had been in there for about 15 to 20 minutes. So what do you think? Why do you think Sue wanted to go to the bank?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I can think of is what was uh, brought up in the film is that she was looking at probably maybe some life insurance paperwork that, because at that point when she was in the car, she realized that there was doubt that he was murdered because she knew his background of the Coast Guard stuff with the knot tying and uh, the way that bodies were recovered when he was in the Coast Guard of people who had drowned in bodies of water. They had weights tied around them. So she probably put that together right away that this may have been a suicide. And I think that that's what happened. And I think I'll add that a lot of people might view that as, why would she think about the money right away? And, it could just be a matter of she needed it, because I don't think she was working. I don't know, but I don't think so. I think Tom might have been the only working parent. And, they probably had a mortgage on the home and they had the two kids, I believe. And she just needed that money to take care of the family. So that could just be the reason for thinking that way.
So yeah, again, a lot of life insurance, they have exclusions for suicide, and so maybe she was checking to see whether or not there was a suicide, because at that point she thought Tom had committed suicide. And this is before the $2 million settlement with the police department. So yeah, she has two kids, and now Tom, her husband, the provider, is gone. So that would make sense. Cal goes on to say that Sue had a conversation with Tom's mother where she's mentioned multiple times that she did believe that Tom committed suicide. And then something that was interesting, Sue noted that when in her bedroom in the ceiling panels, she was looking for something and a business card fell out. It was a Green Bay Police Department business card, and it had the names of several police officers written on them. So, how did that business card get up there, do you think?
Well, the only thing I can think of is this. We know that whole saga of when Tom was freaking out that he would be found out that he made the call. We know that he didn't share any of this with Sue. He kept all this to himself. And I think this is just my own idea. I think that he just had those names written on the business cards because he was probably talking with a bunch of different people at the department. And he put, for whatever reason, I don't know why he put it up in the ceiling, but he just put it somewhere where it wouldn't be found, because I think he wanted to just deal with this privately. He didn't want to involve any of his family and get them worried and involved with this problem. So he wanted to deal with it on his own, and so he hid the card in the ceiling. And then, do you want to say what Sue did with it?
Uh, it said she burned the card, and we can't really figure out why she would do that.
Yeah, it's weird to. I mean, I could totally get throwing it out or just disposing of it in some way, but burning it, I mean, that makes it so that it can never be found. That's a little unusual. I mean, the only thing I can think is that they had a fire going in the fireplace already, and she just threw it in there. But otherwise, other than that, I don't see why you would burn it.
So Steve Kaplan, Kutzka's new attorney, he pointed out that around Tom's neck and around the weight itself, there were half-hitched knots tied. And a half-hitched knot is something that it's a specific knot that's taught in the Coast Guard. And he makes the point that Tom is the only person, as far as the Monfils six, who would have known how to tie that knot. And Cal also pointed out that he went to Tom's house and he found other instances where he had made this half hitched knot. So what did the knots tell to you? Do you think that the knots could have only been tied by Tom?
Yeah, I think it's clear that he likely is the one, just because, again, among the pool of people that we're talking about here, he knew how to do that. No one else did. One thing I want to add too that's interesting is that in the film they talk about, with Cal bringing those nails with the little threads tied around it with the knots. those knots had been tied by Tom, but this was introduced at this 2015 hearing we were talking about earlier. So these knots had been done at least 23 years before, and he still had them. So it shows that I guess they hung on to a lot of stuff from him.
Kaplan also brings up the point that when he read over the autopsy, it didn't make sense to him. He thought that how could the coroner have known that the injuries were caused before Tom got into the vat? The lawyer Kaplan, he thinks that when Tom went into the vat, and again, one of the engineers at James River stated that Tom would have been sucked into the rotating blades as soon as he jumped in. And so Kaplan thinks that these blades are what caused all of his injuries. And in particular, the blow to the back of his head was 3/8 inch, and that directly matches the size of the blades. So what did you think about that?
Well, to me, that's kind of like a quote slam dunk type thing for showing that we don't have all the information with this Monfils 6 conviction. Why wasn't this looked at? That kind of seems like basics. Again, that's what I was referring to earlier with how evidence wasn't processed. That's kind of, to me, that's something that would be looked into like Investigation 101. And actually, this brings me to another point that I was making before when we were talking about the intellectual level of somebody pulling off a murder. Cal had said that he doesn't believe they could outfox the police. Well, I'm going to add this. What outfoxing was there even to be done? To me, we see that the police weren't even very competent with their investigation. We know they weren't competent with this whole tape release. So there's not really a lot of outfoxing to do because the police weren't really that thorough with their investigation. What's remembered lives. Losing someone precious from our lives is the most painful event that one can endure. Seasons of Life Memorials is dedicated to making sure the person you lost is never forgotten. We work with you to help you craft a film about your loved one's life that can be viewed at the gravesite. We can also help you create a film about your very own life that can be viewed in the obituary section of your hometown newspaper. Imagine that, your friends, relatives, and neighbors viewing your own unique story and how your life truly did matter. Visit our website, seasonsoflifememorials.com, and follow us on social media today to start viewing what we can do for you.
So one of the things that the documentary brings up then is Cal Monfils sort of in a roundabout way says Sue Monfils knows that Tom committed suicide, and she kind of kept quiet because she wanted to get the insurance money. Is Sue the villain?
I'm not going to say that Sue is the villain because I don't have the whole story. I don't have her side. What I'll say is it does seem to show that she wanted to keep the whole suicide thing a secret, and she was probably glad that the autopsy results were never reversed because she wouldn't have gotten that money. And again, I don't even know if she got a life insurance payment for Tom. We don't know that. But it's safe to say there maybe was something, right? We don't know if she got a life insurance payment, right?
No, we don't.
Yeah, we only know.
Oh,
go ahead.
I was gonna say you think that the police would have looked into that.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing we know is that she got the 2 million from the lawsuit for them releasing the tape, which she should have or would have gotten anyway, most likely, because that had nothing to do with the whether it was a suicide or not. It was just the releasing of the tape led to the the events of Tom dying. So I think she would have gotten that money anyway, the 2 million from the city. Uh, but where the villain part might come in is that it may show that deep down she knows that Tom killed himself and she has never come forward. And that would be very wrong if that is the case. But again, we don't have her side of the story. She's been completely missing really since the whole case started.
So the documentary ends with Mike Pye sort of getting out of jail, and it's interesting because the Monfils conspiracy book begins with Mike Pye getting out of jail um, early, after a couple of years, and I just thought that was kind of interesting. For the documentary itself, I think it would be just maybe perhaps too depressing if it didn't end on somewhat of a hopeful note. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's good that they decided to end it with Mike getting out. And also I liked how they showed that that Cal and Mike are, I don't know if you'd say they're friends, but they are on good terms, you know. I think Cal's probably the only one in the family though that's like that, but uh they've been able to kind of put that behind them and just look at the facts for what they are and not have any biases. Um, so it's good that they were able to show that.
I should point out too before I forget. In the Q&A after the documentary was over at the Milwaukee Film Festival, um, Winkler went out of his way to state that the blades inside of the vat would have pushed Monfils away, not sucked him in. And Zukowski was standing right next to him while he said that. So it's just kind of interesting that uh, after all these years, they're kind of still lying, right?
Yeah, and I mean that refutes the guy because the person who said that he would have been sucked in was like some engineer at the mill, right? Or some the guy who was very familiar with how that tissue vat worked. So I think I think he would know, it kind of shows you like what you said that they just don't give it up. And that leads me to a point that I found disturbing is with Zukowski. When Mike Piaskowski was released, he was exonerated by the Judge Gordon. Zukowski still is not willing to admit that, even though that's legal. You'd think somebody who's in the law profession would be willing to admit what's written right in front of them. He was exonerated. He wasn't mistakenly released, as Zukowski says. And that's just so disturbing to me that you have somebody who is supposed to represent the law and he isn't even willing to admit what happened.
So another thing that's excluded in the documentary is David Weiner. He's entirely cut out. He's not mentioned at all. Why might that be?
I have no idea. You said maybe just timing wise, just for runtime for the movie, but one thing I liked about the book is that they did offer like 4 or 5 different alternatives as to how Monfils ended up dead. And yeah, the movie kind of goes with suicide mostly, or the Monfils 6 not being guilty. they don't really go into any other murderers as a possibility.
So it was stated in February of 2014 that Brian Kellner had intended to sign something that a letter basically that stated that the Fox Den situation never happened. We also learned again, Kellner was worried that if he went to prison, his wife might get custody of their kids, and so maybe that's a big reason why he just signed off on the Fox 10 to begin with. But unfortunately, Brian Kellner was not able to sign that. He died just a few days before he was supposed to. Do you think anything would have been differently if he would have ended differently if he had been able to sign that letter?
Well, it sounds like, uh, at least for Keith Kutska, I think he would have been able to get out, only just because this was Keith Kutska's attorney that was doing all this. Maybe it would have applied to the others. I don't know how that all has to work with appeals, but yeah, it's possible. I mean, they were definitely on the track for, uh, like I said, at least getting Keith exonerated potentially. But these things drag out for so long. This was in 2014. You know, Keith ended up being released, what, 2023?
Yeah, I think August of
So
2023.
for all we know, I mean, it would have taken that long anyway, just with how things drag out.
Winkler then goes on to claim that he had a fantastic life before the Monfils case, and the Monfils case more or less sort of ruined his life. Um, what do you think in terms of Winkler having a fantastic life before? Do you believe him?
Yeah, I believe him. I truly do. I think he loved being a police officer. I think he loved being a detective. So yeah, I do genuinely believe that he is uh, distraught, and it was a huge blow when he lost his job. I think that's shown. I mean, he gets emotional about it. So yeah, I believe all of that.
Cal ends the documentary by saying that he hasn't seen Tom's kids for over 20 years. And I guess it's speculated that he says that because Sue Monfils is basically hiding the secret that she really knows what happened, right?
I don't know. That may be. It's sad. That's all. That's all I know is that that's sad. I don't know her reasons. It's really unfortunate and sad that uh, Cal can't even see, or he doesn't even know his niece and nephew. Um, I think they. I think Tom had a boy and a girl. I don't remember. Do you know?
Yeah, a
Okay.
boy and a girl,
So
yeah.
yeah, Cal doesn't even know his niece and nephew, and his, like Cal said, his daughter doesn't know her cousins. So and it really doesn't necessarily need to be like that. So there's a lot of mystery there as to why Sue isn't in the picture. I don't fully get it. We'd have to get her side.
I don't think that's going to happen for sure.
It's very possible,
But
yeah.
in the end, yeah, in the end credit sequence, it mentions that Winkler and his wife live on an asparagus farm. So it turned out all right for them in the end.
And
We should mention too.
I was just gonna say with Sue, it's possible that she just wants nothing to do with any of that, you know? Like she just wants to forget that part of her life, you know? Um, I don't know. Everybody deals with grief differently. And Yeah, I mean, we really, only she knows, so it'd be great if we could get her side somehow. What were you going to say?
Next week's episode of the Monfils 6 podcast will be our last episode. We will be wrapping up the series. And Mike and I will be giving our takes as to what we think really happened to Tom Monfils. And we're also hoping to bring on a few other people to give takes, on what they think might have happened to him as well. So it should be a super fun episode, probably be a little bit longer. What are your thoughts, Mike, on next week's episode?
Yeah, I think that it'll definitely kind of showcase what we really think has been going on. We've maybe hinted at it a little bit here and there, but I know I definitely have my thoughts on what actually happened, so I'm looking forward to talking about that with you, because you and I really haven't even talked about it. We're kind of saving it for the show.
And remember, you can always follow us again. We'll have information in terms of our new obituary podcast as well. But new episodes of the Monfils 6 podcast drop every other Friday. Please join us again. Thanks for listening.
Have you recently lost a loved one and want to hold on to their memory forever? We create individual and unique video-based obituaries that will allow anyone reading your local newspaper or visiting the gravesite to view the video and your memories of the loved one. Contact us today at seasonsoflifememorials.com.